Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Delaney, I've been listening to your answers about your conduct in the St. Paul's case, and I have to tell you, I'm having a hard time following what it is you're saying. You've said now several times that the school only wanted the court case to be tried in a court of law, not in the media. But your attempt to strip anonymity from Chessie was exactly an attempt to try this case in the media, right? It was an attempt to bring her name forward so everybody would know who she was. She's 16. Everybody would know exactly who she was, could look her up, could threaten her, intimidate her. I mean, this was an attempt to put her squarely into the media spotlight nationally, right?
Senator, thank you for the question. I respectfully disagree that the school's intent in trying to require the lawyers to try the case in the court of law was in any way intended to intimidate any of the parties to the case.
How can you say that when you knew full well that a 16-year-old girl would have her name published, would have reporters, no doubt, in her front lawn, would have people following her around with cameras everywhere? Her family's sitting here today. They've already been through hell. Your motion was an attempt to put them through further hell in order to defend your client, right?
Senator, I was an advocate for the school.
I understand that, but as advocates, I have been too. And as advocates, we make decisions, but we're responsible for those decisions. You made a decision here. You made a decision to try to strip a young girl of her anonymity, and you effectively succeeded because you bullied her into it. So she, unwilling to be intimidated by you, went forward and revealed her own name, which took, by the way, tremendous courage. And I'd just like to honor her for her courage in doing that. But you put her to that choice. You did. That was your choice. So that's fine. You made the choice, but now you're accountable for it. So let's have some accountability here. You deliberately did this in a way that would put her at risk, and that was your intent. Have you read the letter that she submitted to this committee?
I have read the letter that was submitted to this committee.
Let me read some of it to you. She says, and I quote, "I remember so clearly reading Michael Delaney's motion from front to back when I came home from my new high school one day, processing what it meant, and then defiantly stating to my parents that after everything I'd been dragged through, from anonymous death and rape threats on the internet to the betrayal of and backlash from my closest friends at school, I wasn't going to let Michael Delaney's dirty tactics bully me, then 16 years old, into shame and silence." She goes on, and this is important. "When survivors of sexual assault, harassment, and abuse come forward to seek some semblance of justice, there is an army of attorneys with a tried and true playbook of tactics to discredit, pressure, and manipulate survivors and victims into silence." Those were the tactics that you used, Mr. Delaney.
Senator, I respectfully disagree with that characterization of the role I played as an advocate in the case. The school agreed to allow the case to proceed with anonymity. I have...
No, you didn't. You filed a motion that specifically sought to strip her anonymity. I have it right here. I've read it, and I've read your reasons for doing so. The school didn't like the time that the parents and Chessie filed their lawsuit. You complain that counsel filed the complaints minute before the clerk of the court's office closed on June 1st, 2016. Well, I'm sorry for you, but I don't understand why your inconvenience about the time should mean that this young woman should have to surrender her anonymity and have her life. She's a survivor of sexual assault, let's not forget. That already happened. You knew that. Why should she have to have her life further destroyed because you didn't like the timing of the filing?
Senator, I represented the school in that case. I did not represent the Prout family. I understood what they went through. The school felt that the request to restrict the lawyers from trying the case in the media was compatible with her desire to proceed with privacy and anonymity.
I don't understand what you're saying. You filed a motion that sought to strip her anonymity. You told the court that it should happen because you didn't like the time at which her counsel filed their complaint because it put your school at an inconvenience. They had to answer reporter questions, you said. Frankly, that seems to me like a small burden to bear after what Chessie went through. So you made the decision. You forced her to come forward. She was brave and did it, and now you're accountable for that. And quite frankly, I'm astounded you've been nominated. I can't believe we're sitting here having this conversation today. And I, for one, will not support your nomination for these reasons. People who put sexual assault victims through this kind of torture shouldn't sit on the bench. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cornyn.
Mr. Shogan, when you were here last year, a number of senators asked you, including me, a series of questions about articles you'd written, public statements you had made on social media that were, I have to say, pretty grossly partisan, and I thought offensive, and you and I went back and forth about it. After that, a number of us asked you questions for the record relating to these statements. I want to follow up on one of them. I, in particular, asked you to give us a full accounting of the public posts that you had made on Twitter. You had locked your Twitter account before you came before this committee. It had previously been public. I asked you to provide the public posts that had previously been available on Twitter because the ones that we have were pretty disturbing. You responded as follows, and I quote, "My personal Twitter account is comprised of posts about my mystery novels, events at the White House Historical Association, Pittsburgh sports teams, travels, and my dog," end quote. Is this an accurate statement?
Yes, Senator.
I just remind you you're under oath. Is this an accurate statement?
Yes, Senator.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your Twitter posts then that I was asking you about. On February 18th, 2022, you posted on Twitter bemoaning the dropping of mask requirements for children, including those under the age of 5. Do you remember that post?
No, Senator. Those tweets were in my personal capacity.
No. I asked you, would you give all public posts that you had made on Twitter? You said no, effectively, and you said that your Twitter posts consisted of mystery novels, events at the White House Historical Association, Pittsburgh sports teams, travels, and my dog. And you just told me now under oath that you stood by that. So now let's talk about your Twitter posts. On February 18th, 2022, you posted bemoaning the fact that mask requirements for children under the age of 5, one of whom I happen to have, by the way, had been dropped. Is that a post about your dog or sports teams?
My social media is in my personal capacity,
Answer
Senator.
my question, please, because you've testified under oath that you only posted about your dog and sports teams and novels, and you also said you wouldn't give this committee any of your public posts. So, is your post on February 18th, 2022, bemoaning the lifting of mask requirements for children under the age of 5, who I might just ask, all of the data has said is extremely harmful to children, these mask requirements? We'll leave that aside for now. Is that a post about your dog or sports teams? Yes or no?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
Yes or no, Ms. Shogan? You are under oath before this committee, and I have to say, you have placed this issue squarely in record by repeatedly refusing to answer. Yes or no?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
So you're not answering my question. Let's talk about another post. 26th of May, 2022. You talk about an assault weapons ban, retweet a post, ban assault weapons now. Say you agree with this idea that you have to be a certain age to buy so-called assault weapons in America. Is that a post about sports teams or your dog or mystery novels?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
What about the post on January 5th of 2021 in which you say that Ted Cruz ought to stay in his own lane and not worry about what's going on in Pittsburgh? This is a reference, I think, to questions he had about the certification of the last election. Is that a post about your dog or sports teams or mystery novels?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
What about the post, you remember December 10th, 2020, where you said that you were hoping that President Trump would have his vetoes overridden, and you agreed with the post that he was a weak policy president? Is that a post about your dog or sports teams or mystery novels?
My social media is in my personal capacity.
What about your post on January 5th, 2021, in which you speculated that President Trump would pardon himself next participating in conversation about the certification of the Electoral College. Is that a post about sports teams or mystery novels or your work at the White House Historical Association?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
What about the post? Do you remember this one? I said we seem to be having an incredible case of amnesia, but maybe you remember this one. This is from December 3rd of 2021, in which you advise an individual who goes by Meg on social media that the Library of Congress, you advise this person to complain about religious flags that have been planted on the grounds of the Library of Congress, and you say that they ought to be removed. And you go on to give this person advice about how to complain and have them removed. Do you remember that post?
My social media is in my personal capacity.
Do you remember the post?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
I have to say, I have been here for 4 years in the Senate. I have never seen a witness stonewall like this before. Never. And I've seen a lot. This is extraordinary. Do you remember this post? December 3rd, 2021.
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
I mean, this is unbelievable. And you want to be the archivist of the United States. You lied to us under oath. You lied to us in your QFRs. You just lied to me a second ago under oath. And now you're sitting here stonewalling, not answering questions about public posts that you've made. Are you a lawyer, Ms. Shogan?
No, Senator.
Are you familiar with the Shirtliff case at the United States Supreme Court?
No, Senator, I'm not.
Well, in that case, the Supreme Court held that, in fact, it constitutes viewpoint discrimination for a government entity to remove religious flags from its property when it's opened up the property to allow other people to put flags on it. Exactly the question that you were addressing in your public posts on Twitter. You're giving legal advice, which you're not qualified to give, directly contrary to the United States Supreme Court. I just wonder, does this have to do with your view that you wrote about that the religious right is connected to the rise of anti-intellectualism in American politics? Is that why you said what you said about religious flags, that the religious right is a force for anti-intellectualism? Explain that to me.
No, Senator.
Do you stand by your comment that the religious right is part of the rise of anti-intellectualism in American politics?
Senator, that article was written. It was about how Republican presidents use common sense terminology to effectively communicate with Americans.
Yeah, in which you said that the religious right, the rise of the religious right is part of the rise of anti-intellectualism in American politics. I just point out that's the article in which you say anti-intellectual, the title is Anti-Intellectualism in the Modern Presidency, Republican Populism. Very nonpartisan. Dr. Shogan, I'm going to ask you again, will you give to this committee your public posts on Twitter? Will you make them available to this committee?
My social media is in my personal capacity.
Mr. Chairman, I have to tell you, this is the most extraordinary thing I have seen in my brief time in the Senate. I have never seen a witness blatantly lie under oath like Dr. Shogan has just done to this committee, stonewalled this committee, and just repeatedly refused to answer my questions about her own posts that are in public. For these reasons, I will oppose your nomination, and I strongly, strongly urge this committee to take action on this and force this witness to own up to the fact that she is misleading us right now before our eyes, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hawley, at your convenience, the floor is yours for as long as you would like to take it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the ranking member, Senator Ernst. Thanks to the witness, too. I apologize. I've come from another hearing where I was the ranking member. Let me, Mr. Saeed, say thanks for being here again today. It's been a while since we talked last, and a lot has happened since then. I imagine you've been asked about a number of these questions, but I just want to make sure that we've covered the waterfront on this. Let's talk about Engage Action and the statements they made regarding the state of Israel, so we can get this satisfied, these questions fully answered. Again, I'll take a look at what you've said to other citizens. As you know, Engage Action made a number of statements about the state of Israel. You served on their board. What would you say about the statements that this organization on whose board you served made, and how would you separate yourself from them?
Senator, good to see you. You know, my allyship with the Jewish community, my work with Israel as a partner, both at the State Department and as a businessman all my life, I think speaks for my my take on this issue. I have worked with Israel-based companies. I've mentored Israeli entrepreneurs my entire life. In my current role as a public servant, I'm advancing U.S. commercial interests around the world, including partnering with Israeli entrepreneurs. And so I think that is what I stand for. I'm not going to be able to speak for Engage's position on these. I have clearly shared with the board, with the committee, in the previous process as well, as to where I stood on the questions that were asked of me.
Let me just, so you say you can't speak for Engage Action, so let me just ask you your own view. Engage Action has said that Israel is an apartheid state. You don't believe that, do you?
Senator, I have been very clear about my positions. I have not spoken. My position on Israel is I have engaged with Israel. At the State Department, I'm engaging with Israel as a senior official.
Can I just get a yes or no? I think that this should be, pretty easy. Is Israel an apartheid state?
It's a specific term. I don't believe it's an apartheid state. And so that's, again, my work and how I work with Israeli businesses and entrepreneurs speaks for how how I'm treating that ally of ours.
Okay. Engage Action issued a statement of support after a House member equated Israel and the United States to Hamas and Taliban terrorist organizations. Do you think that Israel is a moral equivalent of a terrorist organization?
Senator, as I said earlier, I am not speaking for the organization.
No, I'm asking you. Those
are not my views.
Oh, good. I'm just looking for a yes or no. These are meant to be easy questions.
Those are not
super
my
easy.
views.
Okay, so the answer is no?
The answer is no.
Okay, good. Engage Action has issued a statement calling for a ceasefire in which they said that the current state of affairs is not a case of both sides being responsible. The state of Israel is an occupier when it comes to the Palestinians. Do you agree with that?
Senator, let me just say this, and I'm happy to clarify further, but my entire career is I have engaged with the Jewish community. As I mentioned earlier, I have engaged with Israel as a business person. That speaks for my record.
Yeah, but can we just answer my question? I mean, do you? I heard all of that, but my question is this: do you think that the state of Israel is an occupier?
Could you elaborate occupier?
No, I'm reading to you from Engage Action. Quote, this state of affairs is not a case of both sides. They have that in quotation marks. Not when Palestinians are occupied and the state of Israel is the occupier, end quote.
Senator, I'm going to speak for what I believe in, what my values are.
Yeah.
And my values are that I have worked with Israel. I've advanced a commercial interest with Israel.
But do you agree with that statement? Just yes or no? I'm just trying to give you an opportunity
That is Engage's statement, Senator.
I know that. That's why I'm asking you if you agree with it or not.
So, Senator, I am not going to be able to speak for Engage's statements. Engage does not speak for all my views. And my views on Israel and my work with the Jewish community in the United States and around the world, I've made that abundantly clear. And a lot of the allyship that I have in this room also reflects on that the incredible support I have in the Jewish community.
Well, my time's expired, and I have sorely tried the patience of the chairman and the ranking member, who've been very gracious to hold this hearing open. So I think what I'm going to do is I'll give you some questions for the record. I mean for this to be easy. I thought your position is that you didn't agree with any of those things. I just wanted to get that on the record. Maybe I've misunderstood. If I have misunderstood, then I'm really concerned. But I'll give you some questions for the record, and we can just put it in writing, and that way we'll allow you to go. I think you've been here a long time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator.
I'll put into the record the statement from the AJC, the American Jewish Committee, on this.
Which has always been the practice of this committee, certainly over the last 2 years when I worked in the position as chair, and that will continue. The committee will now proceed to the consideration of Colleen Shogun to be the Archivist of the United States. The question is on whether to favorably report the nomination. The clerk will call the roll. I'm sorry, I didn't. Did you wish to be recognized?
Yes, could I please, Mr.
Senator Hawley, I'm sorry, I did not see you.
That's all right. No, I just put my hand up just now. before we vote on this nomination, I just want to express my deep reservations with this nominee and explain why I will be voting no, and appeal to my colleagues across the aisle to join me in trying to get relevant documents from this nominee from the Congressional Research Service. This is a nominee who was before the committee last September, I believe it was. We have a pattern from this nominee of stonewalling this committee, misleading this committee, and now she's doing the same with, frankly, very disturbing whistleblower accusations that came to us at the end of last week. I'm sorry, I think it's been almost 2 weeks ago now. Let me just refresh here the record. In September of last year, when the nominee first came before the committee, Senator Portman asked her a series of questions about her statements made on Twitter. Senator Portman's staff had found these statements themselves. She had locked her Twitter account at some point when she was in the nomination process. They found her Twitter statements, which were highly partisan, I think highly inappropriate. She refused to answer Senator Portman's statements at the time, questions at the time. So I introduced a question for the record asking her to please give to us any Twitter statements she had ever made that had been available to the public. She refused, and she then said, do we have that board, guys? She then said the following in response to my question for the record. She said, my personal Twitter account is comprised of posts about my mystery novels, of which she's written several, events at the White House Historical Association, Pittsburgh sports teams, travels, and my dog. It was made private months ago before I was nominated as archivist. Now, we know from the Twitter post that Senator Portman found this is simply not true. It is not true that her posts are composed of comments about her mystery novels and so on and so forth. We know that they are composed of highly partisan statements. When I asked her about this, I gave her a chance to correct this testimony. She said she stood by it. I then asked her, I went post by post, where she criticizes former President Trump, where she criticizes members of the United States Senate, where she expresses highly partisan views, where she suggests that religious groups should not be able to put up religious symbols on federal property, which is, by the way, not in accordance with the Supreme Court case law. And in all of these, she then refused to answer my questions. Now listen, she's entitled to have her views. She can say whatever she wants, and she can say whatever she wants on Twitter. But what she cannot do is lie to this committee. And to say to this committee that her post consisted of this, when we know from Senator Portman's research that's not true, is simply false. That's point number one. Thank you, Vijay. Point number two is after that testimony, a whistleblower, former employee of Dr. Shogan, came forward to my office. We have a normal whistleblower procedure. I'm sure you all do. We followed that procedure. I think she came to us on a Friday. We sat down with her as quickly as we could, following our usual procedure. I then called the chairman about this, and we're going to refer her allegations, I'm saying her because she's allowed her identity to be used, to the committee, which we did. The committee staff had an opportunity to meet with her. I understand they did again yesterday. And I will just tell you, and I know you all are aware of this because I've sent you all my letter that references the allegations that were made. The whistleblower said that when Dr. Shogan was at CRS, she engaged in partisan conduct and abusive behavior, allegedly, that she allegedly made unsolicited statements of support for political candidates in the workplace, that she also attempted to organize signing events for her book on federal property during work hours for commercial gain. That's the book that features the killing of a Senator Langsford, yeah. Senator Langsford seems to be doing well, though, I'm happy to say. The whistleblower further alleges that Dr. Shogan engaged in a pattern of abuse, retaliation, and persecution, including undermining the whistleblower's promotion, and that Dr. Shogan failed to discipline subordinates who made racially derogatory remarks to the whistleblower. The whistleblower is a woman of color. Now, when the staff, as I understand, asked Dr. Shogan about this, she repeatedly said she couldn't recall, she didn't have documents, and she referred staff to CRS and said you should contact CRS to ask for promotion documents, to ask for documents about her workplace event with her book. So last night, I sent a letter to CRS asking for the relevant documents. And all I would say, drawing to a close now, Mr. Chairman, what I would say is I would humbly suggest and request that we postpone a final vote on this nominee until we get these documents that Dr. Shogan referenced but said she didn't have, she couldn't get us, and repeatedly referred us to CRS. So I've asked for them from CRS. I think we should get them and look at them and do our due diligence on these whistleblower allegations. That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else wish to comment on this nominee? Seeing none, the question is now whether to favorably report the nomination. The clerk will call the roll.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to all of the nominees. Judge Ali Khan, I think last time you and I visited, it was before the Homeland Security Committee. And I asked you a number of questions there, you, including some for the record, you answered those, which I appreciated. One question that I ask you, and I ask every nominee actually on that committee and this one, is whether or not the nominee has ever litigated against a religious liberty claim. Usually the answer to that's no. In your case, you answered yes, and you listed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different cases over a period of years, actually, in which you have litigated against individuals or churches' religious liberty claims. So let's just talk about a few of those, if we could. Let's start with some of your work during COVID. Case you list here, Capitol Hill Baptist Church versus Bowser. Do you remember that case?
Yes, Senator.
You remember working on that case?
Yes, Senator.
This was a case involving the district's lockdown policies that shut down churches in the district. Is that correct?
It concerned litigation over provision of the lockdown policies. The policies restricted all types of activity in the district.
All types of activity in the district?
Yes, Senator.
Did it restrict mass protests in the district?
Well, it restricted activities that one normally expected, including work, going to stores. It also did include these provisions that were challenged concerning churches.
So it exempted unusual or unlikely activities that's in the statute, that's in the ordinance?
When the mayor was enacting these orders at the outset of the pandemic, I think she was trying to be as comprehensive as she could, and the order did restrict a number of daily activities of district residents.
But it exempted mass protests?
I don't believe it said anything one way or another.
Can you point me to the text where it exempted mass protests?
I don't believe it said anything one way or another.
Of course it didn't, because it didn't exempt mass protests, right? You know that.
I think it was silent on the issue because I don't believe it was contemplated by the mayor's office.
Ah, so you think that mass protests should be in a different category than religious observances? Is that your position?
I think if there were protests on the book, then the mayor might have thought about that when she was enacting the COVID-19 restrictions. But I think she was trying to protect public health.
So you think it's fine to say to religious people that they are prohibited from gathering outside, wearing a mask, socially distanced. They can't do it. But if you want to come and protest, defund the police, if you want to support that, that's fine. You can gather en masse, person to person, close up, thousands of people. That's okay. That discrimination's okay. That is your position?
Senator, that is not my position.
It was your position. It's what you argued.
I did not write these orders. What I said.
You defended it in court. And you just articulated to me what I take to be your position.
What I was doing in a Capitol Hill Baptist Church was defending the mayor, my client, against a constitutional challenge to one aspect of the COVID-19 restrictions. We understood that strict scrutiny applies.
How did that case go for you?
We lost that case.
Why?
It was found that the restrictions did not meet the standard of strict scrutiny.
Meaning they were unconstitutional.
Meaning that they did not survive strict scrutiny. And it's a matter of public record that the District of Columbia did not appeal that decision.
Why? Why were they struck down?
Excuse me, Senator?
Why were the restrictions that you defended struck down as discriminatory? Why were they?
Because they did not satisfy.
Why didn't they?
The court concluded that there were restrictions that were not neutral of general applicability.
Yeah. That's legalese. Why didn't they? Why didn't they on the facts? You know the facts. You were a good lawyer. Why'd you lose?
We lost because applying the strict scrutiny test, the court concluded that the restrictions were not narrowly tailored to serve a compelling governmental interest.
Because?
Senator.
Oh, come on, Judge. Don't make me do this. Do you want me to go through it for you? You lost because Mayor Bowser was going to mass protests herself personally with thousands of people celebrating them. By the way, which is fine. We have the First Amendment in the United States. I want to be clear. That is totally fine. You want to protest? Go for it. I think that's totally fine. That wasn't the problem here. At the same time she was doing that, she was prohibiting churches, religious people, from gathering socially distanced outside wearing masks. And the district court said, you can't do that. That's discrimination. You can't separate people out based on their ideological beliefs or their positions. You can't do that, right? Isn't that what the district court said?
The district court said that
do you agree with that?
Could not survive strict scrutiny.
For those reasons, right? Why are you fighting me on this? I can't figure this out.
I am not fighting you, Senator.
So yes, you agree. That's what the district court said.
That was what the district court concluded.
Do you think they got it right? The district court get it right?
The district court, we did not appeal that decision. I think that district court decision is consistent with rulings that we got from the Supreme Court clarifying the application of the religious test to COVID-19 restrictions in Tandon and the Brooklyn Archdiocese.
My time's almost expired, and I know other senators want to ask questions, so let me just very quickly here. Do you think it's wrong to discriminate on the basis of religious faith?
Absolutely, Senator.
Why did you argue that religious services, religious people pose a greater risk of infection than people gathered to argue for defunding the police?
I was representing my client. The mayor and consulting epidemiologists had issued orders that she thought were going to protect public health. It was my role to defend those as a
Why did you make that argument? This seems like a strange argument to me, that religious people are somehow, more infectious than folks who have other ideological positions? I don't get it.
My understanding was the nature of singing and other things epidemiologists thought could transmit COVID at a higher rate.
You didn't put any scientific evidence on the record for it?
Senator, those were fast-moving cases, and they weren't going to full briefing and full summary judgment with a record.
That's not what the district court said. The district court said that you engaged in, and your client engaged in, and you defended discrimination on the basis of religious belief, that you offered no scientific evidence for it, that you pressed these arguments over and over and over without any foundation. Frankly, I'm disappointed that you made those arguments. You can choose what arguments to make. I'm disappointed you made those arguments. I'm disappointed you persisted in defending them here today. And for that reason, among others, I will not support your nomination. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Tillis. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Federico, let's keep talking about the Gann case that Senator Blackburn was just asking you about. This is a case where the sentencing guidelines recommended up to 240 months in prison. The guidelines range was 210 to 240. Do you remember what range or what number you asked for from the court as his attorney?
I'm sorry, Senator, I don't recall the exact sentence.
It's 105, so less than half of the lowest end of the guidelines range. Now, the government in this case said that it was being very lenient. I've just read their sentencing memorandum and yours. I have them all right here. The government said it was being very lenient. Do you remember what they recommended to the court?
I'm sorry, Senator, I do not.
189 months. 189. You pushed for 105. Why is that?
Well, Senator, I'll note first, I've prosecuted those cases in equal number to the number I've defended. And so I have worked with victims, and I understand.
So what would you say to the victims in this case who, let's just review, Mr. Gann, I'm not going to read the specifics, it's too revolting. But let me just, this is from the pre-sentence report. This particular defendant, this is sanitized, but it's still unpleasant. The defendant used multiple mediums to access, obtain, and distribute depictions of child rape, bondage, and sexual exploitation. He used dating websites to meet people offering children for sex. He used email to send depictions of child sexual exploitation to his cohorts. Why 100 months? I mean, listen, you could have recommended any number of, I get that you want to defend your client, sure, but you could have chosen 175. You could have agreed with the government, 189, which they characterize already below guideline sentence and quite lenient. You advocated for 100. I mean, do you think that that's a sentence that does justice to his victims? You say you prosecuted these cases.
Yeah, well, Senator, yes, you noted the difference between when I'm court appointed to represent them and zealously their interests compared to when I prosecute them. But ultimately, the decision as to the appropriate sentence in that case, like all others, lied with the district judge, Judge Brooms.
Right, but you made a choice to recommend and to advocate for a particular sentence, right? I mean, I'm looking at your memorandum right here. You did author it, I think, right?
Well, Senator, also when formulating a sentencing recommendation, the client's objectives also weigh heavily upon what we would ask the court to do when it determines.
Well, I'm sure the client would like to have 0 time in prison. So if you were going to just regurgitate what your client wanted, I'm sure he didn't want to be in prison at all. So some of the arguments that you made, you said that he had a work history that demonstrated that he was employable. Why should that result in a sentence of 100 months below the lowest guideline recommendation? I mean, how does that help his victims? I'm trying to understand here why you advocated this sentence for this individual.
Well, Senator, the sentencing statute 3553A tells the district court that it must take into account his history and characteristics. And so it is my job as his court-appointed advocate to present to the court information for it to take into consideration, things like employment. So
you're totally comfortable with this. You don't have any regrets about this at all?
Well, Senator, also as a defense lawyer, of course, When I am court appointed to represent someone, it's not a personal endorsement upon their conduct. It is my job under our Sixth Amendment.
But nor are you an automaton, Mr. Federico. You're an officer of the court. You're a very capable attorney. You have to make moral judgments as a defense attorney. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, of course.
Yes, you have ethical obligations as a defense attorney. Wouldn't you agree?
I certainly do.
You have ethical obligations to the court as a defense attorney. Wouldn't you agree?
I do.
Okay, so your brain is fully engaged. You have a moral responsibility to society. Listen, I mean, you can recommend, as his attorney, you do whatever you want, right? But you're asking here for a lifetime appointment. So I think it's entirely appropriate we ask you about your judgment in these kinds of cases. This is a case with a defendant who committed very serious crimes against children and frankly contributed to a social problem so significant. This committee has recently passed major legislation, I hope will soon pass into law, that would overhaul our system with regard to this crime, and rightly so. So I want to know from you, do you think that the sentence that you recommended does justice to his victims?
Senator, I could not agree more about the problem.
That's really kind of a yes or no question, I think.
Well, Senator, again, on that case, I recommended the sentence weighing.
I know you did. Did it do justice to his victims?
Ultimately, it's the court that determined his.
But you had to make a decision, Mr. Federico. You had to make a decision as his attorney and an officer of the court whether this was appropriate or not. I'm asking about your judgment here. So are you comfortable with it now in retrospect? Are you comfortable with that? Do you think that sentence, 100 months, over 100 months less than what the lowest end of the guidelines was, 89 months less than what the government characterized as a very lenient sentence. The court ultimately gave him 165 months, years more than you wanted. Do you think that did justice to his victims?
Senator, again, it wasn't my decision as to his ultimate sentence. It was my decision.
I don't understand why you won't answer this question. I mean, isn't the answer yes if you're comfortable with it as his attorney? You can't blink your own responsibility in making the recommendation, right?
Well, Senator, I just don't recall, in particular in that case.
What's to recall? We've talked about all the salient details. I just read you your memorandum.
Well, I don't recall exactly how I landed on the specific sentencing recommendation that we made to the court.
Yeah, that sounds to me like you know it was a bad idea. It was way low, way low, and now you can't defend it. And frankly, neither can I. And for that reason, among others, I'm going to oppose your nomination. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Federico, did you say that you prosecuted cases of this nature as well?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have.
How did you happen to end up as a defense counsel in this case?
I was court appointed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Langford. Senator Hawley, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to all the nominees. Thanks for being here. Mr. Tubb, if I could just start with you. I want to talk about an issue in my home state. Just over a month ago in August, Knox County in Missouri was struck by an EF2 tornado, destroyed 62 homes, also destroyed the Bering, Missouri post office. I mean, almost completely. It leveled it. And current reports are that post office will not be rebuilt. Now, you can probably understand my concern with this. This is a small rural community, much like the one that I grew up in. The post office, as you know, is a lifeline to these communities. I mean, it's contact with the outside world, of course. It's a delivery mechanism for medical supplies. It's absolutely vital that our rural communities have access, like everybody else, to regular postal service. So I realize what your role is on the Regulatory Commission, and it's primarily an oversight role, but let me just ask you, do you agree that the Postal Service should prioritize rebuilding rural post offices in a timely manner so that we can keep the flow of mail and other services available to everybody across the country?
110%, Senator. This has been an area that the Commission has actually been concerned about in providing oversight. It's suspended post offices, where the Postal Service, for emergency reasons, suspends a post office. And we have found, unfortunately, over the years that they tend to drag their feet as to making that decision on reopening. And just to underscore how much I agree with the concern, Senator, I was born and raised in northern New York State in the foothills of the Adirondack Mountains. I was chief of staff for a decade to Congressman John McHugh, who represented that area. It was 14,000 square miles, one of the largest House districts east of the Mississippi. And a lot of those communities may not have had much, but what they did have was a post office. and that's critical to binding our nation together.
Absolutely. I'm glad to hear you say that. I think it's absolutely vital that we keep these rural post offices open, and that when they are faced with challenges, particularly natural disasters, that we rebuild them as quickly as possible. And I don't have to tell you, I mean, for many of these communities, if you say your post office is not going to be rebuilt, it's almost a death sentence. I mean, you're saying to the community, we're just going to cut you off from the rest of the world. We're going to cut off your ability to get to the prescriptions you need, to get the information you need, to get the deliveries that you need. So I'm glad to hear you say that. I hope you'll work with me as it relates to Bering, and I may have more to follow up with you about that.
Happy to, Senator.
Great. Thank you so much. Mr. Okocha, let me ask you, I noticed that you've served on the board of directors of a foundation called the Greenlining Institute. Is that right? Have I got that right?
Yes, Senator.
Since 2021, looks like?
Yes, Senator.
And you were previously a legal fellow at the same institute? The website of the organization says that it focuses on, I'm going to quote it now, the intersection of climate action, racial justice, and economic equity. Have I got that right?
I believe so, Senator.
Okay,
Yes.
Fair enough. All right, so I assume that you're also familiar with the Supreme Court's recent and widely reported, much commented upon decision, Student for Fair Admissions versus Harvard. You know about that case?
Yes, Senator.
Yeah, that's the case that held that Harvard and some other universities, that their admissions programs that took into account race-based factors were unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment, Equal Protection Clause. All right, I'm asking you this because I want to ask you something that the Greenlining Institute said about that case. The Greenlining Institute said that that ruling by the Supreme Court of the United States, striking down consideration of race in college admissions, that's an accurate rehearsal of what the opinion is, that decision is a willful disregard of America's racist history. Let me ask you, does that represent your view?
Senator, I'm not familiar with that statement, and I can tell you, Senator, that I did not aid in crafting that statement, and I can tell you that I recognize that SFFA versus Harvard is the law of the land, and that if I were confirmed as a judge, I would apply that law and would apply the law in SFFA versus Harvard.
Okay, very good. Let me ask you about one other. It's a lengthy statement, but let me ask you about one other piece of it. Same statement from the Greenlining Institute about the same case. The statement is, this quote is, we need race-conscious solutions to the longstanding and persistent structural barriers caused by systemic racism. Now, the reason I'm asking about that is that's exactly what the Supreme Court says in the Fair case the universities may not do. So does this reflect your view of the law?
Senator, I'm also not familiar with that statement, and I can tell you that if confirmed as a judge, I would apply the binding precedent that you spoke of, SFFA versus Harvard, if a case of affirmative action were to come before me.
Okay, so that's what I wanted to drive towards, is obviously you can think whatever you want about the cases. I've been known to criticize Supreme Court cases quite vociferously if I think that they're wrong. But of course, the position that you're going to have, should you be confirmed, will be different. And I just want to be sure that whatever your views may be on any number of cases, that whether you like it or hate it or whatever you think of the precedent, if it's binding precedent, that you'll apply it faithfully. And your testimony is today is that you will, whatever your views may be. Is that correct? I've got that right?
Yes, Senator, without a doubt.
Okay. Let me ask you about something else unrelated to this, but related to your work as a prosecutor. You said earlier that you've experienced prosecuting cases involving sex abuse, and the materials you submitted to the committee, I noticed that includes sexual abuse of minors. I'm wondering if you've ever prosecuted a case involving child sex abuse material, CSAM.
Yes, Senator.
So my question is on that. Do you think, reflect a little bit on your experience in these horrible cases, do you think that criminal penalties against those who are convicted of child sex abuse material, distributing it, having it, making it, using it, do you think that those penalties ought to be strengthened? Do you think we're doing enough to punish and deter the people who engage in that kind of terrible behavior?
Senator, what I can tell you is that I don't believe that's my province. I think that's the province of yourself and other legislatures to determine what the appropriate sentences should be, maximum sentences should be with regards to those crimes. But I can tell you that as a prosecutor, I have worked hard to make sure that people who do commit those crimes are held accountable.
Very good. I'll have some other questions for those of you I didn't get to ask a question. I'm just very disappointed I didn't get to ask you questions. So I'll submit a few for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Senator Carper, you're recognized for your questions.
Thanks so much.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to the nominees. Thanks for being here. Judge Keel, let me just start with you. You're involved, I think, with a group called the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. Have I got that right?
I did a couple cases with them, Senator. It's probably been 15 years at least since I did any work with them.
Okay, fair enough. Have you done some fundraising for them? Do I understand that correctly, or am I misinformed?
I don't believe I've ever done any fundraising for them.
Well, let me just ask you about, I'm curious because of some things they've said recently, so just let me ask you about this and you can give me your viewpoint on it. Earlier this month, right after the attacks on Israel, the AALDEF said that it stands in solidarity with Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim communities, and went on to help push out on social media a toolkit, that's their word, for student protesters that we've seen on our campuses, including resources, talking points, and chants for students who are pressing to end the genocide in Gaza, which of course we've seen invoked by those who are calling for the destruction of the state of Israel. So let me just give you a chance to respond to that. What's your view on that? How do you read this? I mean, how do you read this statement from this group? Just let me give you the opportunity to respond to that. How about that?
Senator, I have not had any involvement with the group for a very, very long time, and my only involvement was representing restaurant workers and wage and hour claims. I'm not familiar with that statement from ALDEF, so I'm not sure that I could comment on that.
Fair enough. Let me just ask you, I assume that doesn't represent your views, your personal views, the position that the group has taken here with regard to the attacks on Israel?
As I said, Senator, I'm not sure in what context or what that statement was. I haven't read the full statement, so I can't really tell you whether
Well, how about this? Why don't I give you an open-ended chance to say, with regard to the attacks on Israel, the threats on Jewish Americans, what we're seeing on our college campuses, where we have some student groups out there saying, from the river to the sea, Palestine must be free, which of course is a call for the elimination of the state of Israel. Why don't you just tell us what your views are on that?
Senator, it's a very complicated issue. I haven't really studied it. It is a terrible situation, what is going on there. And Senator, that's all I can really say what my personal views are.
Well, let me put it to you this way, would you condemn those who are calling for, who say things like from the river to the sea, which is a call for the elimination of the state of Israel and frankly, the killing of Jews in the Middle East? I mean, would you condemn that?
Senator, as I said, I know it's a very complicated situation. It's a tragic situation. I haven't studied the situation. I don't know how I can answer that today, Senator. Because
go ahead.
As a judge and the role that I would be playing, my personal views of things would not come into consideration, certainly, Senator, and I would keep an open mind for all matters that come before me, and that's the way that I would approach the job of a judge.
I totally understand that, and I'm not asking you to comment on any case. I just am I wanted to give you a chance to respond to this group statement, but let me just see if I can get you to understand your views here. Just with regard to the attacks on Israel and the violence in this country against Jewish Americans, you condemn all of that. You have no truck with that. You would say that we should condemn all of that explicitly, I assume, right? I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I mean, you tell me.
Yes, Senator. Any violence here in this country against Jewish people should be condemned.
Okay, and these protests that we've seen where people are explicitly calling for the elimination of the state of Israel. We had Jewish students at Cooper Union in New York who were barricaded inside a library for hours while pro-Hamas protesters banged on the doors, shouted at them, screamed at them. You condemn all of that, I assume.
I'm not familiar with that situation, Senator. I know nothing about it.
Are you familiar with the campus protests that have happened all across the country? The Senate's addressed this in a resolution that passed unanimously condemning the rhetoric of genocide, frankly, against the Jews. I'm just trying to get you to say, I hope, that you condemn that, you think that's wrong, you're against it.
100%, Senator. I would condemn the genocide of Jewish people.
Okay. Yeah. Mr. Fonzone, let me very quickly, because I'm almost out of time now, and there are lots of other senators who want to ask you questions, but I just want to ask you quickly about some work, and we follow up in written questions, but some work you've done for the People's Republic of China, different entities. You did some work for Huawei, I think, in 2018, for the Ministry of Commerce of the Chinese government, and then for the Hong Kong Trade Development Council, if I'm not mistaken, in 2019 and 2020, another governmental entity. That was right during the Hong Kong protests. My question to you is, and I'll give you some more for the record, but my question for you is, did you advise that council during that time of the Hong Kong protests on messaging, on what was happening there? I mean, tell us about your work.
No, Senator, thank you for the question. I know this is an issue of interest to the Senate. It came up in my last confirmation process as well. I think in general, my practice in private practice was focused on advising companies on American law and how American law worked. For the three entities you just mentioned, I did a small amount of work at the request of other partners, much of it many years ago. None of that work has affected my ability to give objective advice in my current role at the Office of Director of National Intelligence, and none of it would if I was fortunate enough to be confirmed at OLC.
This is my last thing, Mr. Chairman. Just last question. But did you, in 2019, 2020, at the height of those protests in Hong Kong, which the government brutally repressed, I saw it with my own eyes, did you give the Trade Council any kind of advice involving issues related to those protests?
No, the advice, and I obviously can't get into privileged information, but the advice we gave was, the work I did was basically on advising them on issues related to my practice, which is around privacy and cybersecurity.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thanks very much. Mr. Fonzone, welcome.
Thank you, Senator Hassan. Senator Hawley, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to the nominees. Thanks for being here. Mr. Cooker, let me start with you. Are you familiar with the case Missouri versus Biden from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals?
I'm vaguely familiar, sir, from what I've read in the open press.
Well, let me refresh your memory. This is the case in which first the federal district court, then the federal court of appeals, held that the White House and assorted other various federal agencies violated the First Amendment of the United States, illegal actions, unconstitutional actions, by coercing and colluding with the biggest social media corporations in the world to suppress and censor protected speech. Let me just read you a few passages. Officials from the White House began communicating with social media companies, including Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Google, in early 2021. From the outset, that came with requests to take down flagged content. In one email, a White House official told a platform to take down a post ASAP and instructed it to keep an eye out for tweets that fall in the same genre so that they could be removed. In another email, an official told a platform to remove an account immediately and said he could not stress the degree to which this needs to be resolved immediately. The court goes on to find, these are findings, by the way, not allegations, findings. Those requests for removal were met. The court goes on. The White House did not only flag content, they started monitoring the platform's moderation activities too, and they often asked for and received frequent updates